Thank you, Sanjida, and hello to all who have joined us this evening. And as Sanjida said, tonight's event is really a follow-up event that was held at Timeless Local History Library and Archives in 2022, based on Four Corners and Shadinata Trustees Project 1978, The Turning Point. And just to set the context, the project was based on photographer Paul Trevor images. Paul Trevor lived in just off Brick Lane in 1978. Basically, he was in the midst of community activism in the 70s, and he knew most of the activists, and in turn, they also knew him. So they would often invite him to come to the various demos that they would organize. So from what we know, he had taken at least 500 images from the year 1978, and he had given 200 of his images to Four Corners and Shadinata Trust to work with them. In the end, 70 of his images were used for the project and mounted as an exhibition. And as Sanjida said, the exhibition is currently at Bancroft Road Library, and it's there till the 16th of March. And I'm sure Sanjida will inform you of the opening hours of the exhibition. So if you haven't seen the exhibition, I would strongly recommend that you do visit Bancroft Library to get a sort of overall view of the movement that took place in 1978. I myself am a community worker. That's my background, community and youth worker. And currently I am a research student at Queen Mary University of London, researching 1978 and the anti-racist movement that took place in that year. So what I'm going to do today is really give you a brief overview of the movement, and then we have a Q&A session after my presentation, where if there are issues, we can talk in details about any issues that might have been raised. So I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation, and following that there would be a Q&A, and then we have a short film to show you. So I think now I'm going to share the PowerPoint. I hope you can see the slides. Okay. So yes. So as I said, I'm studying at Queen Mary University of London, and my studies should be finishing earlier this year. So for my study, I kind of looked at how, following the racist murder of Alta Valley, how the community came together to build a massive anti-racist movement. And more importantly, I'm also looking at, how the movement developed in the following decades, i.e., what has the movement left in terms of its legacy and the long-term impact. My research is in collaboration with Bishopsgate Institute and the obviously the Timeless Local History Library and Archives. And the reason I chose those two archives is because both of them, they hold important historical relevant archival materials that relates to this period of community activism. They hold historical newspaper cuttings, leaflets, pamphlets, flyers, photographs from that period. In addition, I also worked with the Al-Tabali Foundation, set up in 2010 by the activists of 1978, and of course with the Shadinata Trust and the London Metropolitan Archives, as well as exploring private collections held by some of the activists from the 1970s and 80s. Both Bishopsgate Institute as well as Timeless, they hold a number of testimonies of the activists from the 70s and 80s. There are also audio recordings and transcriptions of those interviews held at both institutions. I myself also conducted a number of interviews with participants of 1970s and 80s, which really brings us to May 1978, when Al-Tabali was murdered in a racist attack. I want to say a bit about Al-Tabali. Al-Tabali at the time was aged 24, but he had come to the UK at the age of 15 in 1968, with accompanied by one of his seafaring uncle. Initially, he settled in Birmingham in Midlands. Later on, he came to East London, and he lived in Flower and Dean dwellings just off Brick Lane. Later on, he moved into a flat in Goldstone Street in just off Petticoat Lane. Finally, moving out to Wapping to live with one of his cousins. Now, Al-Tabali was, I would say, a symbolic representation of the community then, i.e., in the 70s, most of the Bengali community comprised of single men who had come to the UK as economic migrants, and many of them were young. Many had also come as children, either with an adult or with a relative. So many had come without their parents. And Al-Tabali, as I said, did come with his uncle, but he left his parents back home, and he had other. I think he had 4 sisters and a brother, and he came here to earn money in order to support his family back home, and that was the case for most Bengalis who were here at the time. They were economic migrants sending remittance back home to support their immediate family and extended family members. Most of the people worked in restaurants, in cafes, and in the clothing and leather factories dotted in and around Spitalfields. I should point out that Al-Tabali's murder wasn't the first or the last. In fact, within a month, another Bengali worker was killed in neighboring borough of Hackney. And going back a few years back, in 1970, another Bengali worker by the name of Tosir Ali was also killed in a racist attack. Here are a couple of images. So Tosir Ali is on the left with the cap, and he was killed in 1970 in Bow. He was returning home from work in the evening, and he was set upon by a number of youths, and he died not far from his home. Ishaq Ali is the person on our right with mustache. Again, he was also returning home from work and he was attacked, and who, as a result of his injuries, died in hospital later on. Many people, many activists and people within the community have labeled the movement 1978 as a turning point. While it's true that for the local Bengali community, 1978 was a turning point, I would suggest that Bengali community activism actually started a few years back. And to be more specific, I would say perhaps 1976 was the year when Bengalis organized themselves formally to challenge and oppose racism. And it started with the formation of the anti-racist community of Asians in East London, who were a loose group of activists that came together to oppose racism. At the same time, Bengali people were facing severe housing shortages and access to decent housing. So there was a squatting movement at the same time where many Bengali families would occupy council accommodation in order to force the council to offer them housing and later on, decent housing. And I think if you're interested, there is a book that came out last year that captures that period of history of the community. The book is titled Sylhet to Spitalfields by Shobna Begum. And at the same time, there were also a number of young men within the Bengali community who would go and patrol Bengali families who lived in isolated housing estates, who then later on formed the Bengali Housing Action Group. So this was all around 1976. And here we can see a march by the Bengali community. I think it's down Commercial Road. And if you look towards the back, you can see the banner of Bangladesh Welfare Association. So Bangladesh Welfare Association at the time was an active organization. In fact, it's the oldest and largest Bengali community organization, which I'm afraid at the moment is not functioning very well, but it still does exist. And here we can see another march being led by the Anti-Racist Committee for the Defense of Asians in East London. So this is 2 years before 1978. And again, the Anti-Racist Committee of Asians in East London is marching with the Spitalfields Bengali Action Group. So if you look closely at the images, you can see the banner of those two groups. However, I think following Altawali's racist murder, I think the response from the community was different in the sense that perhaps for the community, this was the last straw in terms of racist violence and attacks and killings. And the killing of Altawali happened right bang in the center of the Bengali community, known as the heartland of the Bengali community. The reaction to the murder of Altawali was spontaneous. Following the murder, led by the Bangladesh Welfare Association, a number of Bengali groups and youth groups came together to form another umbrella body called the Action Committee Against Racial Attacks, which organized one of the biggest rally and march following Altawali on the 14th of May, where up to 10,000 Bengalis met in St. Mary's Garden. And from there, they marched all the way to Hyde Park behind the coffin of Altawali. And then on their way back, they stopped at 10 Downing Street to hand in a memorandum demanding protection and justice from the state. I think what I'm going to do now is perhaps tell you a number of events that took place in the summer of 1978. In fact, not just the summer. I think it was throughout the 1978 a number of protests, rallies, marches, sit-downs took place, organized by the community. Let me just. So I'm just going to go quickly just to highlight some of the main events that took place in 1978. So while we know that Altawali was murdered in 4th of May, a month before that, on the 20th of April, a 10-year-old Sikh boy by the name of Kenneth Singh was murdered in the neighboring borough of Newham. And then, of course, in May we had the murder of Altawali, and then we had the big rally that took place on 14th of May. And then the next month, 11th of June, despite the Hyde Park protest and other activism by the Bengali community, Bengalis were still facing racist violence on a regular basis. So on the 11th of June, about 150 to 200 skinheads rampaged through Brick Lane, throwing bottles and lumps of concrete into Bengali shops and smashing windows. The day marked the escalation of racial violence in the area. And this attack took place following a sensational press coverage of so-called ghetto plans published in Observer, which detailed how the Greater London Council was setting aside blocks of flats for the Bengali immigrants to respond to the demands of the Bengali community. So following this report, the next day, i.e. 13th of June, hundreds of Bengalis and non-Bengali residents came together at the local community center, the Montefiore Center in Hanbury Street, to oppose any segregated housing termed by the press the so-called ghetto housing. The following Sunday, 18th of June, some 3,000 to 4,000 people took part in a march to protest against the violence of the previous week, i.e. when the 150 to 200 skinheads ran riot in Brick Lane, smashing up Bengali shops and attacking individuals. The march went from Brick Lane to Bethnal Green Road, Cambridge Road, and then finally returning to Brick Lane via Whitechapel Road. And as I mentioned, Ishaq Ali was murdered, within a month of Altawali. Ishaq Ali was murdered on the 25th of June. He was 45 years of age at the time, and he was attacked in his near his home in Urswick Road, Hackney, by 3 white youths. They were punched, and one report mentions of a bootlace was used to trying to strangle them. Ishaq Ali, a father of 5, collapsed with a heart attack and died soon after being taken to hospital. According to one of his relatives who was with him that evening, said that the youths had called them packy bastards and stinking blacks. The perpetrators of the attacks were never caught. On the same day, there were skirmishes between Bengali and white, racist white youths. There were a number of arrests. One white youth was charged with carrying an offensive weapon, and 2 Bengalis were charged with causing bodily harm. So in July, following the murder of Ishaq Ali, a number of anti-racist and community groups in Hackney and Tower Hamlets came together to form the Hackney and Tower Hamlets Defence Committee. In July again, we had a high-profile visit from the Commission for Racial Equality. The chairman then, David Lane, came to the Montefiore Centre to talk to the local community. And within 5 days of his visit, on the 12th of July, a group of Bengali workers, when they're leaving their workspace at Charrington Wine and Spirits Depot in 3 Mills Lane, Bow, they were attacked with a hail of stones, bricks, and bottles by 30 white men who were waiting in 6 cars. The attack left 9 workers bleeding and injured. 7 workers were treated to cuts and bruises, and 2 were detained in hospital for head and rib injuries. 16th of July was the start of 2 days of action organized by the Hackney and Tower Hamlets Defence Committee. They staged a sit-down at the top end of Brick Lane, at the junction of Brick Lane and Bethnal Green Road, in order to prevent the National Front from selling their literature. On the same day, the Communist Party held a public meeting against racist attacks in Toynbee Hall on Commercial Street. The same evening, a packed meeting in the Naj Cinema. Following a packed meeting, about 2,000 people marched down Brick Lane. The next day, on the 17th of July, and this is for the first time, I would say, that 10,000 Bengali workers came out on strike in solidarity with the campaign against racism. The day was labeled as Black Solidarity Day, and all the workers who worked in the local factories, restaurants and cafes all came out. They were joined by workers from Fort Dagenham and local school students. Due to the strike, virtually the whole of Brick Lane and Spitalfields was shut down. There was also a march down Brick Lane, and the march went to Bethnal Green Road via Cambridge Road and returning to Brick Lane. While marching along Bethnal Green Road, 2 white men from a car abused the marchers, urging them, saying, come on, Pekis, come and fight. As some of the marchers went to confront the racists, police instead arrested 2 Bengalis and a white anti-racist. So the marchers decided to sit down outside Bethnal Green Police Station, demanding the release of the 3 arrested. They blocked Bethnal Green Road outside the police station until the police released the protesters. And I think in the exhibition, in Paul Trevor's exhibition, there is an image of one of the stewards of the marchers being released and being carried on shoulders of other protesters. And there's, of course, images of sit-downs outside the police station. On the 18th of July, there was another march by Bengali youth against racism. On the 23rd of July, the National Front ordered a national mobilization to reassert its influence in the Brick Lane area following the events of previous weekends. And as a result, Bengalis and anti-racist groups called for mass action every Sunday. So over the next few months, Bengalis, anti-racists, and the National Front faced each other regularly at the junction of Brick Lane and Bethnal Green Road. On the 1st of August, in the House of Commons, Arthur Latham MP supported the demand by the Bengali community to carry out a judicial inquiry into policing of Brick Lane area. He cited police harassment and bias and said that on the previous Sunday, it appeared police were there not to prevent National Front from occupying the pitch, but to facilitate their actions by providing protection. So this is something majority of the activists had said about the police not being helpful and not really responding to their call when under attack. In fact, many have said that the police accused the police of being racist and said that often when called for help, the police would come so late that the perpetrators would flee the scene. And instead of going after the perpetrators, they would harass the victims by questioning their immigration status, and sometimes they would arrest the victim rather than, going after the perpetrators. On the again on the 20th of August, there was another march, a huge march of 5,000 people through the streets of East London. The same weekend, the East London Advertiser reported an attack by white youth on the homes of Bengali families living in Ashton Street in Stepney. While the Advertiser chose to highlight the continued racism, the Asian Journal drew a parallel between the rising racial tensions around Brick Lane and the famous Battle of Cable Street in 1936, when the Jewish community confronted the British Union of Fascists. Then in September, we had the group that organized the rally following Altawali's murder, the Action Community Against Racial Attacks. They organized a music carnival against racism in St. Mary's Garden on the 10th of September. And I think on the 24th of September, as an act of provocation, the National Front they moved their HQ from Twickenham to Great Eastern Street in Shoreditch. As a reaction, some 2,000 anti-racists blocked all entrances to Brick Lane to prevent National Front coming into the area. And finally, I think in December, the police decided to open a station in Brick Lane, following demands by the community for protection. So on the 1st of December, the then Home Secretary Marlene Rees opens the Brick Lane police station. However, the racial violence was far from over. On 10th of December, in the neighboring borough of Hackney, and 19-year-old West Indian by the name of Michael Ferreira was killed by 3 white men on Stoke Newington Street. So the racist violence against the Bengali Black and Asian community continued in East London and the neighboring boroughs. So in terms of alliances forged, as I mentioned, the first march that was organized in May was led by the Bangladesh Welfare Association, supported by Bengali youth groups, namely the Bangladesh Youth Front, Bangladesh Youth Association, Bangladesh Youth Movement, Progressive Youth Organization, and the Bangladesh Youth League. And they obviously mobilized their own membership, they used their own networks, but at the same time, they also linked with other groups within Tar Hamlets and beyond Tar Hamlets. Local trade union, members of Communist Party, the SWP and the East London unit of Anti-Nazi League all came together to support the campaign against racism in East London. And of course, activists from Hackney, Newham, and even from Southall would come to the East End of London, especially on Sundays, where the anti-racist activists would face National Front on the opposite side of the junction of Bethnal Green Road and Brick Lane. And this alliance, was a long-term alliance, which I'll talk about later on. The other thing I want to say is that many people think that the anti-racist movement that started in 1978 perhaps ended fairly soon. That wasn't the case. In fact, the movement that started in the mid-70s went on throughout the 80s, and I would say perhaps stopped in mid-90s. So the image that I'm showing you now is from 93 or 94, when Derek Beacon from the BNP was elected as a councillor in Isle of Dogs. And instead of National Front, we then had the BNP turning up every Sunday at the top end of Brick Lane, to provoke an inside hatred against the Bengali community. I think I'm running out of time, so maybe I'll quickly talk about perhaps how did the movement develop in the following decades. So following the Bengali-led anti-racist movement in Tar Hamlets in 78, a new generation of brave, radicalized Bengali youth emerged as leaders, building alliances with other anti-racist campaigns across London and beyond. And one of the key legacies of that movement was in 1980, all the youth groups coming together to form the Federation of Bangladeshi Youth Organization, in short known as FBYO. So the FBYO not only fought against racism, but also had campaigned for improved housing, healthcare, and education. And they successfully secured local and national government funding to support their work. Many FBYO members became youth workers, social workers, local government officials, councillors, serving the East London Bengali population. And I think by this time, the Bengali community had become impossible to overlook or ignore, prompting the government to initiate the Home Affairs Select Committee report on Bangladeshis in 1986. So in the wake of anti-racist movement, the Bengali community in East London began securing political representation in the 80s. In 1982, Nurul Haq became the first Bengali elected as an independent councillor in Spitalfields, while Ashik Ali was elected a Labour councillor in St. Catherine's ward. Bengali representations gradually grew in Tar Hamlets. And as we know, the current mayor is of Bengali origin. Most of the councillors, I would say 90%, are of Bengali origin in Tar Hamlets. The two members of Tar Hamlets at the House of Commons are of Bengali. We also have a peer in the House of Lords, which I would say reflects the rising influence of the community. I want to end with a quote from an activist of the Bangladesh youth movement, Rajunuddin Jalal, who said, "The legacy of the murder of Altaf Ali and others is that British Bangladeshis are able to live in the UK with some freedom, dignity, and respect, and our future generations will become custodians of multicultural Britain and will be committed to creating a fairer society for all." Thank you.